joining me on this video. It's the third video in the series about the geometry and its creation. It's a very basic introduction to the geometry concepts of BitByBit, but nevertheless it's the important one. In this video we will be discussing the polyline. It's the third video and it's the third category in this geometry group. So we already discussed the points and lines, and now we will go to discussing the polyline. The polyline is a bit more complex than the line, and a bit more complex than the point, of course, but as with everything in geometry, things build on top of each other, and polyline is just a higher order thing that you can create. So let's start by just creating ourselves a regular grid, as we do always, just to give ourselves the orientation. And polyline has two subcategories: create and apply. These categories you can find in all of the geometry categories. And to create the polyline, you see that you really have only one component, and you have to provide the polyline with points. Polylines are basically made out of multiple segments of lines, and they are just defined by the list of points usually. So in order to draw the polyline, you have to use those draw components, and you can apply various methods on the polylines. In this tutorial, I'll just create the spiral points that we also saw in the previous video. I will use this component for it, and I'll make a heavy use of variables today. So if you don't know how they work, you can also go and check the variables introduction of BitByBit on the YouTube channel that we have. Or you can stick around and I'll give a brief introduction also here, so no problems. So in order to create the spiral, we also already saw that we can just create it with this component, and then we can say, okay, we want to draw those points like that, and if we do this, you get the points in the good order. And that's it. But if we want to also create the polyline from this spiral, we should create the variable that holds all those points in it as a list. So points of the spiral will be my variable that I'll create, and I will set that to be the spiral. And now, as we also discussed in the variables video, it's this variable is a sort of wormhole that can be used to transfer this data of points to many different places, and we can do that now by saying, okay, we want to use it here to draw the points. Let's pick some nice color for those points. Let's make their size a little bit bigger, and let's draw them. Let's also decrease a little the density of those points, so it's less intense, and we would see what happens when we create the polyline like this. So in order to create the polyline, we can also use the same points of the spiral, so this variable begins to pay off. We don't need to create this component every time we need to use the spiral somewhere. So we plug the points of the spiral input inside the polyline with points, and let's see, we can then just draw the polyline itself, and let's check what the effect is of that. Voila. So you see that the polyline goes through each and every point, and it adapts. And whatever you do with these spiral components, you will see immediately everything being adapted to the new information. The model is parametric, so That's how you can think about it. So Polyline was created. It's not a big deal. It's a really simple concept, of course. Maybe not as simple as the line that just has a start point and an end point, but still quite simple. What we can do as well is we can measure things like length of the polyline. This is a more complex shape. We can do that to check what is the length of it. So to do that, you can just go to the text and print out the length in bit by bit by doing this. Length of the polyline. And so now we could just copy paste this code again and run it, and we would get the length being 54.49. But just to keep this concept, look, every time we duplicate this code, it runs twice, and now we have actually 2 polylines in our memory. So it's better to also create the variable for the polyline here, just to be concise with our approach to variables in this video. And I'll do that. So polyline variable, then you should never type variable probably to the variable. Everyone knows that it's a variable, but I'll do this devil work here. And so polyline with points was created, assigned to the variable, and now this isn't needed anymore. And you can just pick the polyline variable here and assign it to 2 places. So now there are 2 variables, like points of the spiral, and then the polyline variable itself, and both points of the spiral are used in 2 places like that, and polyline variable is also used in 2 places like that. And this becomes more and more useful the more data you create. So imagine, managing 20 places where polylines are created or spirals are created. That would be really hard work, and I talk about that in this variables video, so do check that out as well. So now if I run it, I will get the length again, and nothing has changed in principle, but this is a nicer code that is easier to maintain. I think I've covered a little bit, but just to be more thorough, let's see what else we can do with the polyline here. We can transform it, so transformations can be applied on polylines to move them up or down or rotate them. You can find all the transforms here. It's a list. There are new ones that I will be adding here, but the basic ones you can already use here. And we can check how many points there are on the polyline, not only measure its length. We can also reverse directions of the polyline, so we can so that all the start points become endpoints and so forth, so that the points would go in different directions in the list. We can also transform the polyline into the curve. By doing that, we could apply methods of the curve, and you see how many are there. Quite a few actually, but it's not necessary, so it's just the helper method. And in fact, we can try this one. So we measured the length. We can, for clarity's sake, also measure how many points does this polyline have, and guess what? It should be this number. So if everything's correct, the amount of points in the polyline should match the amount of points that we asked spiral to contain. So if I click play, you see that 50 is the right answer, and that's how this model is consistent in itself. I think I discussed now everything. The only good thing maybe to mention before we continue is that it's very important to, as I said, also for points and lines, to realize that you can, when you have a list of polylines, you have to use this kind of component to draw polylines and not a single polyline. because this will optimize your performance, and it will be faster and much more memory efficient. So be informed on that, and I hope you will use it correctly. Also, these draw options that you have here, like color, opacity, width, they all have certain effects. Of course, you can change colors and widths and whatnot, but you also have to remember to keep this updatable property to false while you're dealing with static geometry like we do now, and only when you will have animated polylines, for example, in the render loop, then you can access this polyline mesh and update that in the iterations, but then you will also have to set this updatable property to true. And I'll be making videos later on when we go about the iteration loops that will explain this drawing concept. So thanks a lot.